I'm Martha, a 28-year-old massage therapist at a local hospital. My days usually involved routine treatments until Mrs. Rossi, a feisty retired woman with osteochondrosis, became my regular patient. She had a knack for prying into personal matters, which I usually navigated with a mix of professionalism and humor. One afternoon, as I was working on her stiff shoulders, Mrs. Rossi's voice cut through the room's tranquility. "Martha, dear, you have such magical hands. Tell me, what does a job like this pay?" I smiled, continuing my motions. "It's around $4,000 a month, Mrs. Rossi." She clucked her tongue in a mix of surprise and disappointment. "Only $4,000? I thought such a skill would fetch more." I shrugged, keeping the conversation light. "Well, it's enough for me. I enjoy the work more than anything." Changing gears, she suddenly said, "You know who you should meet? My son, Antonio. He's the owner of that Italian restaurant downtown. A real catch, if I may say so." I hesitated, recalling the few times I saw Antonio. He was quite charming and easy on the eyes. "I don't know, Mrs. Rossi. I'm quite busy with work." "Oh, nonsense," she exclaimed. "A young, attractive woman like you shouldn't be alone. Let me arrange something." Before I could protest, she had already made up her mind. True to her word, she set us up on a date at his restaurant. Antonio was more than I remembered, charming, with a warm smile and eyes that sparkled with humor. Our conversation flowed effortlessly, filled with laughter and shared interests. Weeks turned into months, and our casual dates grew into a serious relationship. One evening, as we walked along the river, Antonio stopped and looked into my eyes. "Martha, I've never met anyone like you. Will you marry me?" His proposal took me by surprise, but it felt right. "Yes, Antonio, I will." Our wedding was a small affair but full of love and joy. Afterward, Antonio suggested, "Why don't we move in with my mom? Her house is big, and we could save some money for our future." The idea seemed practical, and I agreed. Initially, life in the Rossi household was harmonious. I helped with chores, and we both contributed to the family expenses. Little did I know that this new chapter of my life would soon take a challenging turn. Living in the Rossi household started off as an agreeable arrangement, but a few months into our marriage, I began to notice a shift in responsibilities. It was gradual at first, but soon, the burden of household chores fell almost entirely on my shoulders. One weary evening, after spending the whole day relieving tense muscles and soothing aching joints at the hospital, I came home to a scene of chaos: dirty dishes piled high, laundry scattered, and the living room looking like it had been hit by a small tornado. Exhausted, I found Antonio sprawled on the sofa, engrossed in a football game. "Antonio, the house is a mess. Can you help me clean up?" I asked, trying to hide my frustration. He glanced around, seemingly oblivious. "Oh, it's not that bad, Martha. I had a rough day at the restaurant, lots of issues to deal with." I started picking up, feeling the day's fatigue weigh me down. "But you've been home for a while now, and I've just got back. It's only fair we both contribute." He let out a noncommittal grunt, eyes glued to the screen. "You're better at this stuff than I am. I'd just get in the way." This pattern continued, growing more defined with each passing day. I found myself doing all the cooking, cleaning, and managing the home, while Antonio's contributions became increasingly scarce. A few days later, I decided to have a serious talk with him. After dinner, which I had prepared, I broached the topic. "Antonio, we need to discuss the housework. It's becoming overwhelming for me to handle everything alone." He looked up from his phone, seemingly annoyed. "What's there to discuss, Martha? You're great at managing the house. I'm busy with the restaurant." His dismissive attitude stung. "But we're a team, Antonio. It's not just about being good at something. We should share these responsibilities." He sighed, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. "Look, I'll try to help out more, but you know my work is demanding. I'm running a whole business, not just giving massages." I bit back a sharp retort, feeling belittled and misunderstood. It's not about comparing jobs, Antonio. It's about supporting each other. As the days turned into weeks, the situation didn't improve. Antonio's promises to help more around the house remained unfulfilled. I found myself spending my few free hours doing household chores, feeling more like a housekeeper than his wife. One evening, as I collapsed on the couch after a long day, the reality of my situation hit me hard. The balance in our marriage had shifted dangerously, leaving me drained and undervalued. I realized that something needed to change, but I wasn't sure how to make Antonio see it too. The day Luca and his family moved in marked the beginning of an entirely new, exhausting chapter in our lives. Antonio broke the news to me nonchalantly, as if it was a minor change. "Martha, Luca lost his job. They can't pay rent, so they'll stay with us for a while," he explained, while I was setting the table for dinner. I stopped in my tracks, the plates in my hands feeling heavier. "For how long, Antonio? Our house isn't that big, and I'm already stretched thin." He shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "Just for a bit, until Luca finds a new job. It's family, Martha. We can't turn them away." Their arrival turned our already bustling household upside down. Anna, Luca's wife, seemed more interested in her social media than in managing her children or helping around the house. Their 3 kids, aged between 3 and 8, were little bundles of chaotic energy, leaving a trail of mess wherever they went. One afternoon, after stepping on a toy car for the umpteenth time, I approached Anna, who was scrolling through her phone. "Anna, could you please keep an eye on the kids? The house is turning into a war zone." She looked up, annoyance flickering in her eyes. "Martha, I'm busy with my own stuff. You don't have kids, you wouldn't understand." "But Anna, the mess and noise are overwhelming. I work too, and it's becoming impossible to manage," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She scoffed. "Well, I guess you just need to get better at multitasking, then." I walked away, feeling a mixture of anger and helplessness. When I brought it up with Antonio, hoping for some support, his response was disheartening. "Babe, they're family. We need to be there for them," he said, not looking up from the TV. "But what about us, our home? It's turning into chaos," I protested. He waved his hand dismissively. "It's not permanent. Besides, you handle things so well, Martha. You're great at this." Weeks turned into months with no sign of improvement. Luca spent his days on the computer, claiming to be job hunting, while the kids ran around unchecked. Anna rarely lifted a finger to help, leaving me to deal with the aftermath of their daily tornado. I started to dread coming home. My once peaceful haven was now a source of endless stress. Each day, I walked into a house that no longer felt like mine, catering to a family that barely acknowledged my exhaustion. The burden of cooking, cleaning, and maintaining order fell entirely on me. Despite my pleas for help or even just a little consideration, I was met with the same responses. "You're so good at this, Martha," or "it's just for a little longer." I lay awake at night, wondering how a situation meant to be temporary had become my new, overwhelming reality. I felt trapped, undervalued, and utterly alone in a house full of people. The funny thing is that I invested my entire salary in their family every month, all of $4,000. And they took it for granted. The tension in the house had been building like a pressure cooker, and it finally exploded one hectic evening. I came home to the usual chaos and mess, utterly exhausted from my workday. The sight of the unkempt house was the last straw. "Antonio!" I yelled, finding him lounging on the couch with a beer in hand. "This house is a disaster. I'm busting my back at work and I come home to this mess every day." Antonio looked up, irritation flashing in his eyes. "Oh, cut the drama, Martha. It's just a bit messy. You're acting like it's the end of the world." I couldn't contain my frustration. "A bit messy? Look around. It's like a pigsty and I'm the only one cleaning it up." That's when he lost it. He stood up abruptly, towering over me. "Lazy? You call this lazy? I work my ass off at the restaurant while you just rub people's backs." And now you whine about a few dishes." His harsh words felt like a slap in the face. "That's not fair, Antonio. I'm not your maid. This is supposed to be our home, not just mine to clean." Before I could say more, Mrs. Rossi chimed in, her voice dripping with disdain. "Oh, please, Martha. You're just a freeloader here, living in my house, using our things. And you have the nerve to complain." I was taken aback by her vicious tone. "A freeloader? Mrs. Rossi, I contribute to this house, I work hard too." She scoffed. "Work hard? Ha! A real woman takes care of her home and family. You're just sloppy and ungrateful." Their words echoed in my head, each one a stinging affirmation of how little they valued me. I stood there, shaking with a mix of anger, shock, and hurt. Antonio didn't let up. "You should be thankful, Martha. You have a roof over your head because of us. Maybe if you managed your time better, the house wouldn't be such a mess." I felt a surge of defiance. "I am not your servant, Antonio. I am your wife, and I deserve respect." But it was like talking to a brick wall. They had their minds set, seeing me as nothing more than an accessory to their home. Lying in bed that night, I realized that this wasn't a home, it was a prison. And I was trapped with people who saw my efforts as trivial and my presence as a nuisance. It was a sobering, painful realization that I was in a battle I was losing. The day Antonio announced he wanted a divorce felt like a surreal nightmare. It happened during one of our rare family dinners, where the tension was already thick enough to cut with a knife. I was passing the salad when Antonio cleared his throat. "Everyone, I have something to say," he announced, his voice eerily calm. "I want a divorce, Martha." I froze, the bowl in my hands almost slipping. "What? Antonio, what are you talking about?" His gaze was cold, devoid of the warmth I once knew. "I've met someone else, Martha. She's better for me." The room went silent. Even Mrs. Rossi looked shocked, but not for the reasons I hoped. "How much does she earn?" she blurted out, her priorities crystal clear. $8,000 a month, Antonio replied proudly, as if he'd won some prize. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "You're leaving me for money?" He shrugged, the man I married nowhere in sight. "It's not just about the money, Martha. She understands me, unlike you." I was struggling to process everything. "And you think this is okay? To drop this bomb in front of everyone?" Mrs. Rossi piped up, her voice sharp. "Well, it's about time he found someone worthy. Someone who can actually take care of him." The sting of her words was overshadowed by the utter betrayal I felt from Antonio. He slid the divorce papers across the table. "Just sign these, Martha. Let's end this amicably." My hands trembled as I took the pen. I felt numb, the reality of the situation sinking in. Amicably? After everything I've done for this family? Antonio's expression was cold, detached. "It's for the best, Martha. You'll see." With a heavy heart and a sense of unreal detachment, I signed the papers. The room remained silent, the only sound being the scratching of the pen on paper. As I stood up, the weight of the situation finally hit me. "I hope she's worth it, Antonio. I really do," I said, my voice laced with a relief I couldn't hide. I packed my things that night, the silence of the house echoing the hollowness I felt inside. Antonio and his family watched, their faces a mix of surprise and confusion at my calm demeanor. Little did they know, inside, I was even rejoicing at the thought of being free from this toxic environment. I closed the door behind me, leaving behind a life that was no longer mine. The night air felt crisp and refreshing, a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere I had just escaped. As I walked away, I realized this was not an end, but a new beginning. Moving into my rented apartment was like stepping into a new world. I took all the furniture and fancy appliances I had bought, leaving behind nothing but empty spaces in Antonio's family home. It caused quite the uproar. I still remember the day Mrs. Rossi and Anna confronted me as I was loading the last of my things into the moving truck. You can't just take all this stuff. It belongs in the house. Mrs. Rossi shouted, her face red with anger. I turned to face her, feeling a surge of defiance. Actually, I bought all of this with my own money. It's mine, and I'm taking it with me. Anna chimed in, her tone dripping with disdain. You're such a selfish brat, Martha. You think you can just walk away and take everything? I shrugged, not letting their words get to me. Call it what you want, but I'm done being your maid and your family's cash cow. I'm starting over. They were fuming as I drove away, but I felt an immense sense of relief, like I had shed a heavy burden. Settling into my new place, I reveled in the peace and quiet. It was small, but it was mine. The day I received the job offer from the prestigious medical center was the icing on the cake. The salary was nearly double what I was making before. I remember calling Sarah to share the news. Guess what? I got a job offer from that famous medical center. It's a big leap in my career, and the pay is amazing. Sarah's excitement mirrored mine. Martha, that's fantastic. You totally deserve this. You're going to kill it. The conversation was a stark contrast to the ones I had in Antonio's house. Here was a friend who believed in me and celebrated my achievements, not someone who saw me as just a means to an end. My first day at the new job was exhilarating. I was greeted with respect. Mr. Johnson, the center's director, welcomed me personally. Martha, we're thrilled to have you on board. Your expertise is going to be a great asset to our team, he said with a genuine smile. I couldn't help but beam with pride. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I'm excited to be here and contribute to the center. Leaving the chaos of Antonio's family home and stepping into this new role was empowering. It felt like I had finally taken control of my life, steering it in the direction I wanted. The days of being undervalued and overburdened were behind me. Now, I was recognized for my worth, both professionally and personally. That night, as I sat in my quiet living room, sipping a cup of tea, I felt a profound sense of peace. The struggles and hardships had led me to this moment, and I was grateful for the journey. For the first time in a long while, I was genuinely excited about what the future held. It was a regular evening in my new life when I heard a forceful knock on my door. I opened it to find my ex-mother-in-law, Mrs. Rossi, standing there with an expression that reeked of desperation and frustration. What do you want, Mrs. Rossi? I asked, not hiding my annoyance. She barged in, her voice laced with urgency. Martha, you need to come back. Antonio's restaurant is tanking. We're drowning in debt. I couldn't help but snort. Come back? After the way you all treated me? You've got some nerve. She glared at me. You're part of this family. It's your responsibility to help us out. I crossed my arms, feeling a surge of defiance. My only responsibility is to myself. I'm not your family's ATM, Mrs. Rossi. She was seething. You ungrateful wench. You think you're too good for us now, huh? Sitting pretty in your fancy apartment? I shook my head, amused by her audacity. I'm not ungrateful. I'm just done being used. What happened to that woman Antonio left me for? Mrs. Rossi's face twisted in displeasure. That gold digger? She left him as soon as the money troubles started. Shows what she was really after. I burst into laughter, the irony too rich to ignore. Well, looks like karma really does come around. Her eyes narrowed. You think this is funny? We're struggling here, Martha. I leaned against the door frame, my resolve firm. Not my circus, not my monkeys anymore, Mrs. Rossi. I've moved on. You should too. She huffed, her anger palpable. You'll regret this, Martha. When you're all alone and miserable, you'll wish you'd helped. I smiled, the sense of freedom filling me with confidence. I doubt that. Goodbye, Mrs. Rossi, and don't come back. She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. As I locked it, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. That chapter of my life was closed for good. I was finally free from the toxic grasp of a family that never truly valued me. My life was my own now, and I intended to live it on my terms. Life after the divorce and the last encounter with Mrs. Rossi felt like a breath of fresh air. I was thriving in my new job and enjoying my newfound independence. One day, while enjoying a coffee break at the wellness center, my colleague Mike dropped by. "Hey, Martha, I heard about your run-in with the ex-mother-in-law. You okay?" Mike asked, concern in his eyes. I chuckled, shaking my head. "More than okay, Mike. It's like a bad sitcom, you know? I'm just glad it's over." Mike smiled. "You've got some guts, Martha. Most people wouldn't have handled it as well as you did." I sipped my coffee, feeling a sense of pride. "I guess I just reached my limit, Mike. No more drama for me." The conversation shifted to work, and as I talked with Mike, I realized how much my life had improved. I was no longer weighed down by the negativity and manipulation of my former family. Later that week, I caught up with Sarah over dinner. She had been my steadfast supporter through all the ups and downs. "You look great, Martha. Really, like a weight's been lifted off your shoulders," Sarah observed as we sat in a cozy restaurant. I smiled, feeling a surge of gratitude. "Thanks, Sarah. It's been a journey, but I'm finally at a place where I feel happy and in control." Sarah raised her glass. "To new beginnings and to a friend who's shown what strength really is." I clinked my glass with hers. "To new beginnings and to friends who stand by you through thick and thin." The evening was filled with laughter and positive conversations, a stark contrast to the tense and uncomfortable dinners at my former in-laws. As I lay in bed that night, I reflected on the changes in my life. I had faced adversity, but it had led to growth and new opportunities. I had learned my worth and vowed never to let anyone treat me as less than I deserved. The following morning, I received a text from Antonio. It was short and seemed filled with regret. "I'm sorry for everything, Martha. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me." I stared at the message for a long moment. Forgiving Antonio wasn't about absolving him of his mistakes, it was about freeing myself from any lingering bitterness. I typed a response, my heart light and free. "Antonio, I've moved on. I forgive you, but more for my peace than yours. Take care." Sending the text felt like closing a chapter. I was no longer bound by the past, and the future looked bright. I had come out of this ordeal stronger and more resilient. As I prepared for work, I felt a sense of excitement about the possibilities that lay ahead. My journey had taught me about resilience, self-worth, and the power of moving forward. I was ready for whatever life had in store for me, and I knew that no matter what, I had the strength to face it head-on.